Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makudir. The time is 8:23, so 23 minutes past 8 Central African time. And today's a very, very special day, the 15th of May, a date etched in the memory of every Palestinian as the day of the Nakba or the Catastrophe. It marks the violent expulsion of over 700,000 Palestinians from their homes in 1948 to make way for the founding of the State of Israel. Sounds familiar as a South African, doesn't it? This was an act of disposition more than anything. That was not a moment in history, but the beginning of a process that continues to this day. More than 7 decades later, the pain of the Nakba lives on in Gaza's shattered buildings, in refugee camps across the Middle East, in stateless children born into displacement, and in the right of return still denied. Today, with Gaza under siege and nearly 2 million people displaced in just what, 6 months, plus, minus, give or take, many Palestinians say the Nakba is happening again. And to help us understand this history and how it ultimately connects with the brutal present, we're joined now by Moulana Ebrahim Moosa from the Palestine Information Network. Moulana, assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah so much for giving us your time and joining us here on Salam Media. It's always a pleasure.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you so much. And just at the outset, I want to also place on record my extreme admiration for the great work yourself and Salam Media has been doing on a variety of issues relating to Palestine, but most lately the excellent reporting from the court, as you've just been speaking about the Loftus file.
No, definitely. The pleasure's all ours. Really, really appreciate it. Malana, I'd like us to begin with the basics, of the Nagba, especially for ourselves. So Salam Media is an extremely increased younger audience, who might not know fully how important this day is and how significant it is, and how ultimately it led to where we currently find ourselves. And again, I always like to draw parallels. When I speak about Palestine as a Black South African myself, because I think it helps it connect a bit better. So 1913, there was a Natives Land Act that saw thousands of black families, black and brown families here in South Africa, forcefully removed from their land by the apartheid government of the day. That act became a law in 19th of June in 1913, and it essentially saw black and brown people taken off their land, something that almost resembles the Nakba. So if you can just unpack it for us and maybe draw those parallels between what happened here at home and what happened to Palestinians 77 years ago.
Absolutely. I think if you were to look at the dates that are involved, you just mentioned, 1913, and you'd see the dates, the years that are involved in Palestine, you'd be able to almost find kind of linear connection between the two, although in different parts of the world and with slightly varying circumstances. One has the onset of the modern Jewish Zionist movement, which happened in 1897. This is when the Zionist Congress under Theodore Herzl convenes in Basel, Switzerland, and that sets into motion the quest to be able to set up as they conceived it, a Jewish or a Zionist state. From then, active settlement is promoted to the land of Palestine, which is then under the Ottomans. And the Zionist movement actively lobbies the major powers of the time from Britain and into World War One, the United States of America, to find a backer to be able to support their project. Now, in terms of the parallels, in terms of dates, you have 1917, which is the Balfour Declaration. One can see a similar time period to the Land Act, but this is where one party, which is the United Kingdom, which also played a very toxic role, obviously, in South Africa. The United Kingdom, which does not own the land of Palestine, does not have a physical footprint in the land of Palestine, during the days of World War One, is already actively planning how to carve out the Middle East post World War One. and they promise a land that they don't control to a party that is not present in the land of Palestine in terms of the Zionist movement at the extent or at the expense of the local inhabitants of the land, which is the Palestinian people. And following the collapse of the Ottomans after World War One, we then find the aggressive British occupation, which they call the British Mandate, which was the midwife for the creation of the State of Israel. And they facilitated the strength of Jewish militia, Zionist militia, and they facilitated Jewish migration into the land of Palestine. And it was so ironic that the very Zionist movement that the British were allowed to grow at the expense of the Palestinians, that movement then felt that it's time for the British to go. They were called terrorists by the British themselves. They attacked the British, and eventually the British pulled out of Palestine in 1948. So when we talk then about the Nakba, again, this is now not an event, as you correctly stated. The Palestinians refer to it as Nakba Mustamirra, which is a continuing Nakba right until this particular point in time. But at the point of if one has to put down a date to it, although we look at it as the 15th of May as we speak today, the State of Israel was declared on the 14th of May. So Palestinians the next day symbolically say this is the beginning of our catastrophe. But even in terms of that timeline, the Palestinians, this possession is seen as a process that began from the partition. So the United Nations General Assembly decides to partition Palestine, despite the Jewish minority at the time, relatively speaking, and despite the fact that they owned less of the land of Palestine, a very small percentage of the land of Palestine, they were given the lion's share or the majority, 55% of the land of Palestine, and the best areas of Palestine at the moment in time. Palestinians were not consulted in this process. They rejected it. And from that point in time, Zionist militia started a series of massacres from 1947 November that culminated with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. But the massacres and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine continued, even beyond that. So perhaps from 1947 to 1949 is the apex years of the Nakba. So again, look at the dates that are involved. 1948, that was the rise of the Nationalist Party, the Nats, the Afrikaner regime out here in South Africa. And one can also find many parallels in terms of how the apartheid regime figures had admiration for the State of Israel, how they visited each other, how South Africa later supported the nuclear project of apartheid South Africa. And lastly, what I would just say, this is obviously such a long history, but just to answer your question is just understand the scale of the Nakba. That 500 villages and towns were completely depopulated. Nothing of this scale. There are wars, there are dispossession that take place all over the world. But we had, even in South Africa, settlers who came. They were happy to live in their enclaves, but their intention was never ever. Their intention was to obviously take control of the land, but never ever to totally ethnically cleanse the population. But Zionism, wanted to take control of the land, maximum maximum geography with minimum demography, maximum land with no Palestinians at all, and therefore they started the system whereby the law of the absentee property law, that any Palestinian was absent from his home in 1948, and this was because they were driven off their land, immediately loses his right to stay in the land, even though he may be displaced somewhere in a refugee camp in that land. Just the fact that when Israel was created, he wasn't at his home, he immediately loses his connection to the land. Whereas you have, on the other hand, the law of return, which makes any Jew around the world applicable for citizenship in the state of Israel, despite the fact that he's never ever lived in the land or didn't have any direct family members who ever lived in the land. Just by fact of that, ethnicity immediately becomes eligible for citizenship. And therefore, the entire process since the Nakba has been one of inclusion and exclusion. Exclusion totally of the Palestinians and inclusion of any Jew around the world. As although many Jews would disagree with the state of Israel self-styles itself as the state of all Jews around the world.
Mm, mm, mm. And you just touched briefly on the UN resolution 194, which speaks clearly about the Palestinians' right of return. Why has this resolution never been enforced? And ultimately, what does it say, about international accountability? And how would you say Israel, which often, rejects the right of return, citing demographic concerns as they always do, um, how do Palestinians and the entire, global solidarity grouping respond to that argument? I know I'm asking a packed question, but we can just stick on those two for now. The UN Resolution 194, what does it say about the Palestinians' right of return? And this excuse that we normally get from Israel, saying, well, demographic concerns are now the reason why they are rejecting the right of return, and how ultimately the world should be responding to it.
So on a level of comparison, one can say one can see the fallacy of the Zionist argument, because the Zionist claim to Palestine is posited on the fact that we are returning, as they would present the argument, we are returning, we have this right to return because we have a 2,000-year link with this land, and we were expelled from this land 2,000 or 3,000 years back, and therefore we have this right to return. Even though there's actually this discontinuity in that particular argument, whereas Palestinians who were there the day before, and Palestinians who still 77 years later still have the keys to their homes and the title deeds to their homes, they are not eligible to return to the land of Palestine. But speaking then about the UN Resolution 194, the fact is, it just goes down to the something that has become so pronounced, Salalo, in the past 18 months, which is the selective reading of international law or United Nations resolutions. When a United Nations resolution gives, obviously there's a difference between General Assembly resolutions and Security Council resolutions, but nonetheless, when a resolution is in favor of the United States and its allies they weaponize it to go to war, for example, on Iraq, but there are successive resolutions calling for a ceasefire or censuring Israeli settlements or calling for the right of return, and that those would be ignored. So that speaks to the problem of international law. But in terms of the third point, which is the issue of demographics, there's two parts to this. Both of these are not being entertained by the Israelis and their allies, which is one is the total affirmation of people want to return to their homes, and secondly, there is an option of compensation. So if, for argument's sake, people would not want to return, or there's no place to return, then why not activate the other mechanism, which is the mechanism of reparations? Basically, from the onset, the Israelis had even assassinated United Nations figures, international figures who advocated for the right of return, people like Count Bernadotte. So even European and American figures who advocated for the right of return, they were assassinated in this particular process. And there's excellent work as well to debunk this idea that there's no place in this land. So nobody's necessarily calling for, nobody's is absolutely calling for mass expulsion or mass killings of all the residents of the land, but there must be some sort of process that says even if the current inhabitants, Jewish inhabitants of the land, decide to stay on the land, the preference needs to be given for Palestinians, and justice must be done. And I was referring to Professor Salman Abu Sitta and the likes of him, who've comprehensively done studies that show the viability of the right of return, how much land, how much space is available in the land of Palestine. But what is critical for the right of return is not the expulsion. Palestinians will decide, international justice will decide on what to do, how to deal with the existing inhabitants of the land, whether it's Jewish or whether it's Palestinian, how to share this land equitably. But what cannot, while Jews and Christians and Muslims can coexist as they've always done on this land of Palestine, what cannot happen is Zionism cannot exist in this land of Palestine. So it's not a case of Jews or any particular ethnicity on the land of Palestine, but Zionism by its very nature is exclusionary, and it only wants the entirety of the land for itself, wants to wipe out all other connections to this land, and therefore for the right of return to become a reality, for everybody to live in peace, the dismantling of Zionism as an ideology is going to be critical.
Very, very important that you mentioned that. This year, the commemoration of the Nakba comes, I think, in the midst of what many are calling a second Nakba in Gaza. In your view, are we witnessing a continuation or repetition of the 1948 tragedy?
I think it's definitely a continuation, because the terminology that would be used by the Israelis is we are finishing the job. We had come, the idea of Zionism was always to ethnically cleanse, to completely wipe out Palestinians from the land, but they hadn't succeeded, whether it was in 1948 or 1967. So they'd always be sitting with the burden in their understanding of Palestinians that they always hope to wipe off the land. So what we see now is nothing different if one were to compare it with the genocidal intent from the very beginning, from the very creation of Zionism and Jewish settlement in the land of Palestine. But what is different about it this time round is the fact that the Zionists have become much more brazen about articulating their genocidal intent, whether it is the famous quotations of human animals from the beginning of this genocide, or the latest pronouncements by Netanyahu that we would like to, we're just waiting for countries to be able to accept the Palestinians, but they have to go regardless. And the actions match with their sentiments. It's just a slow culling process, unfortunately, to use those words of Palestinians, of 50 Palestinians a day, 100 Palestinians a day, together with the destruction of the institutions that would sustain life. The war on their stomachs, the destruction of their farmland, their connection, trying to sever their connection with the land, promoting voluntary migration. But I think there's a silver lining to all of this, is that 77 years later, Palestinians still hold those keys. 77 years later, Palestinians still will say we will never leave this land. Circumstances may cause us to go abroad for some temporary reprieve, but that's never ever translates to a severing of our bond with this land. And equally, one needs to look at this in perspective, that the idea of Zionism is on very shaky grounds. that Israel has continuously used the word existential to be able to describe the nature of the battle that it's facing. So it may seem, rightfully so, from one perspective, that what we see uh, today in the forced expulsion of people from Gaza very much mirrors the very troubling scenes of 1947 and 1948, but seen from another perspective, the fragility of Zionism is on display for the entire world, and that should give us hope.
No, definitely. Unfortunately, we have to leave it on that note. I still had so many questions, but we have run out of time. Moulana, Jazakallah so much for giving us your time. Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Salano. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. That is Moulana Ebrahim Moosa from the Palestine Information Network. And I think a very, very important conversation as we commemorate the Nakba of 1948, as we mark another year since the Palestinian Nakba, a catastrophe that continues to echo through generations. And for me personally, this is a reminder of right here at home, of our own painful history, the 1913 Natives Land Act, which I think Moulana put it so well that it was almost a page taken from the script book of the Zionists. Black people being stripped of their land, their dignity and their rights here in South Africa, and confining them to just 7% of the country's territory. It was exactly that. It was a script taken off the book of the Zionists. Moulana mentioned that the apartheid government here in South Africa really admired, and to some extent, there's some in our society which continue to admire, the Israeli government and the horrific, inhumane human rights violations that they're committing against the people of Palestine. And yeah, it still echoes through the parallels of the two history here in South Africa. It echoes through a legacy of apartheid, which still defines the inequalities that we see today. South Africa is not the most unequal society in the world because, well, it just comes out of nowhere. It's a legacy of our version of the Nakba, and it's still ongoing in Gaza, still ongoing. It's a continuation of a process that was started 77 years ago, and right now, according to the Israelis, according to the Zionists and the pariah state that is Israel, they're now in the end game of that process that started 77 years ago. And I can tell you for free, that's just rhetoric. They're saying that because they want to show a brave face. At this point, we can all agree that Israel is a pariah state. There's no authority, there's no power, there's a false sense of worth, which is guided by the United States of America, making them feel like they're of significance, they're of power, and they're ultimately, going to win this, war that they've waged against the people of Gaza. And I can tell you for free, that will never happen. So as we continue to, remind each other, teach each other about the Nakba and what happened 77 years ago, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we spread the message. We don't keep quiet, we don't keep silent. We, in fact, become louder more than ever about the genocide in Gaza, about those that are aiding it, whether here in South Africa or all across the world. Doesn't matter. It's politicians, it's business people, it's the government itself, as we've seen with the SAPS and what they've done to the Loftus Five. So yeah, whether in Palestine or here in South Africa, the story of land, the story of forced removals, and the story of statelessness, it's not just history, it is a lived experience, and it calls on us not only to remember, I think important to mention, but to act in solidarity with those still fighting for justice, those still fighting for dignity and the right to return home. You're listening to News and Views on Salam Media, where the voices of the oppressed are heard and amplified. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be with you after this. Focusing on Africa. It's Africa Month. Very, very important.